This is Pam Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air with Dr. Albert Bramante. You're a veteran talent agent and you're a coach with a growth mindset. And you've been 2 decades in the entertainment industry. You hold a PhD in psychology from Walden University, and you're a certified hypnotist with NLP and practitioner. So
hmm
there's a lot there. But again, welcome to the Pam Electric Ghost podcast. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for the invite. I'm really happy to be here. I'm happy to
It's
speak to
great
the
to
audience.
talk to. Yeah, it's great to talk to new people all the time. We do want to mention we do have your Instagram up that will be fully clickable. So Instagram.com/dr Albert Monte. Well, you can just click through on that when they're finished. People won't have to remember that. But one of the other things we like to ask at the beginning of every podcast is what motivates you and why do you do what you do?
Well, I love working with actors and entertainers. It's just such an amazing energy that creatives give me, the creative space. I've always been interested in movies and seeing live theater as a kid and growing up, and just being around the whole essence of creatives really gives me life. And I've always considered myself to be a connector growing up. I connecting people together, connecting great people together. And one of the things of being an agent is, kind of like playing a matchmaker between an actor and a project, and finding work for the actors thing. So that sort of is what kind of gives me life. And what really motivates me is being able to be successful in connecting an actor to a job or to a production, and then telling them, making the phone call, telling them they booked the job. That's always an amazing experience. And
That's
it's something
awesome
that,
because yeah, but one of the things that I find really interesting is because you're a doctor in psychology, and I work with creative people. I'm a musician, producer, podcaster. I work with a lot of creators, and the one thing that's kind of like a common theme I've seen with the creative people is a lot of time there's a lot of self doubt. There's a lot of artists that even though they might have a stage presence, they have
Mhm.
imposter syndrome, or they can be very, um, the character of like who they are in person in the studio versus who they are on stage. You can see like there's a lot of angst sometimes in their day to day before they get on stage, and when on stage they're
Oh yeah.
comfortable. Off stage they're like not comfortable. And
hmm
so I've run into that type of person. Not everybody's like that, but I've seen those kind of issues, and it's interesting in your role having a doctor in psychology. You've been able to maybe help people in a way that maybe most agents maybe wouldn't even consider.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up because that's one of the latest book I wrote is deals with self doubt and self sabotage, because I've noticed that you know from my 20 years of doing this, a lot of actors get in their own way, and I think a lot of creatives get in their own way. Like the whether it's self doubt or self sabotage or imposter syndrome, and it really it boils down. It affects a lot of people. Another interesting thing about a lot of actors, and I'm sure you know this too, is a lot of performers is how much they're really introverts by
Hmm.
nature. A lot of I think a lot of people who are not in the field are kind of shocked to find that a lot of actors are, especially actors that work with, are introverted. Even though they may have this powerful stage presence, and even musicians, I would imagine, do have a very powerful stage presence, but yet when they're not performing, they're very introverted. They want to be kind of like their own, they want to be left alone or be in their own little personal, bubble in this sense. Um,
Yeah.
Sometimes, so and a lot of times being forced, because again, when you're in show business, you tend to be forced into like all these crowds, these appearances, these networking parties, these all of these people, these fans, which is great. It gives you life, but at the same time, it's when you have all this overwhelming, feelings, and all this pressure.
Oh, you cut off a little bit. I think your connection might be not so good. So hopefully you'll come back. Yeah, we're having a little trouble with your connection. Let me see. Oh, I think his internet was not good. So wait for him to come back. Hopefully he can fix that. We're having a good conversation. The video started to not match the audio, but we'll wait for Doctor to come back. Hopefully he's not having an issue with his internet. So Dr. Albert Bramante, he's a veteran talent agent and life coach. We're waiting for him to see if there's some kind of issue with the internet. Here we go. Yeah, we were starting to have an issue with your net, but your voice was coming through, but your video was a little off. But hopefully we can continue.
Okay. So as I was saying before, a lot of actors are being pulled in many different directions, between all the different events, that they have to attend, press gatherings, a lot of pressure to always perform and to always be, on, in a sense. So that can put a lot of pressure onto an actor. And also another thing, like especially a lot of performers are what we call empaths. So they feel a lot of different things.
More than most people.
More than most people, absolutely. And I work with actors, and a lot of times with actors, they take on characters. They, when they in a movie or in a play, and they sometimes are playing this character for months at a time.
Mm-hmm. And kind of like a method actor kind of approach.
Exactly. And what a lot of times I feel like what is missing all the time in the method actor training is also being able to turn it off. It's easy to turn it on, but then also how do you turn it off when when a performance is over, when the camera's not rolling? So that is a factor too that affects a lot of actors too. And I even wrote an article about this a couple of years ago on LinkedIn. There's something called post-traumatic stress, which is, how a lot of times taking on a role for such a long period of time, or persona for such a long period, that can actually start, impacting you on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, how do you turn it off? How do you kind of, like, if you're a musician and you're on that stage in front of 200,000 people, sometimes that energy in that moment, it's hard to come down from that. It's hard to come down from your stage persona, and there ends up being all kinds of issues. And I think actors probably have the same situation.
Yeah. Well, it's the same thing. It's being able to turn it off, and because even as actors, even though they're playing, something, when you start to perform something, you start to also develop the mindset too, of whatever you're performing. So you start to think the dark, we're playing a dark character on TV or stage. You start to almost start to think dark thoughts because you hate, acting into that. So, there needs to be training, I think, in a lot of these programs for actors, and I think even for all entertainers, is being able to turn it off. Like when this, you step off stage, it's over.
Yeah, it's hard. I heard Bowie, it's kind of famous that for Ziggy Stardust, a lot of the people around him said he stayed in that character even when he was off stage. Because Bowie was like into the dramatic, he was into like theater. So he brought theater to music. And then when he became these characters like Ziggy or Thin White Duke or Aladdin Sane, he'd actually continue it. Like he had a hard time. He seemed to be operating in a method actor format.
Yeah. And it's hard to turn that off, from time to time. It's hard to just, hit that off switch, in a sense, become connected to who you really are, and I think that this is why I think there's a high amounts of like substance abuse in the entertainment industry, in the show business world, because you need somewhere to numb and escape the pain.
Yeah, there's so much, like you get on that train and you need to they need to kind of be numbed, like you said, to get the noise, get rid of the noise and find a way to get to like isolation. And this is the weird thing with artists, like you said, there's a lot of times they seem to be so connected to the audience. But if you're an artist, a lot of times you're alone with your thoughts. You're alone in the creation period, and there's not a lot of people around, right? And so and it seems kind of counterintuitive, but a lot of times they're very kind of isolated people.
It is a counterintuitive, and I've even heard a lot of our artists say, especially when they're performing on stage, there may be hundreds of thousands of people in the audience. They don't see or hear any experience any of that because they're on their own little world performing.
Yeah, they're in the zone.
And they're in the zone, and that's it. And so that's where I think this leads to a lot of self-doubt, and also as the artist's career is can be very fulfilling, but it's also one of the most unstable.
Yeah, it's very
careers.
unstable
Because there's not a 9 to 5. There's no guarantee, that you're going to find work today or tomorrow. Especially actors. I mean, there's hundreds of thousands of actors, and only a limited number of roles available. So
yeah. So if you get big on one project, doesn't guarantee you're going to be big on all the projects.
No.
And are you going to get pigeonholed? Like if you play that villain, are you always going to be the villain? Right?
Yeah.
If you play that certain type of archetype, are you always going to be that character? And you might want to go and do other things, and you go do a stage play, but it's like, if you get pigeonholed, then you're stuck.
Of course, and you're typecast sometimes, and I've a lot of times what we don't realize is that the archetype or the persona of a character could be totally different from the actual person, the actor, the actual human being, behind that. There was even here not little evidence, like with the star of Sopranos, James Gandolfini, Tony Soprano. What I've heard a lot of times was how different, James Gandolfini is from Tony Soprano. Yeah. And he had a hard time a lot of times on set doing a lot of the, playing Tony Soprano in a sense. Because
that's a difficult thing, because you think about Heath Ledger, and he had a lot of capability. You see, Brokeback Mountain is not the Joker, right? So he had ability to go pretty wide. But they said when he got into the Joker, he really kind of method acted that, and it was hard for him to get out of it, like the stories I've heard. But
yeah, well, it definitely was getting out of character. It was tough.
Yeah, that might be a very difficult thing.
That was definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, Philip Seymour Hoffman, another tragic case. Because a lot of times, these actors are so good at getting into character, but they're not so good in getting out of it. Is a challenge.
It's really interesting because the training is probably so focused on the performance. It's kind of like in the music, like all the record company and your AR people care about is your performance. They don't really care about all the things that lead up to it, as long as you can do that performance and keep on repeating it. And sometimes it seems like you have to, some people like the chaos and the angst and the demons fuel the art, and then the apparatus around you said, oh, well, that's what fuels the art, so we got to keep them in that zone.
Yeah.
So then you're not getting any help from the people around you, because they want to kind of perpetuate it, because they're living off of it too.
Yeah. Well, it's about money. And it's like sometimes, getting an actor to go to a dark place, there's a cost to that, because they're a human being. I sometimes I would, sit in on an acting class, and remember told this one guy, think about the, because there was a scene about loss. Okay. Now, and they told this, the acting teacher coached this actor to think about when she lost her mother. And you start getting really visually distraught. And the acting teacher was sitting there, oh, this is great. Keep going. And I'm like, no, this is not really good at all. From a performance point, yes, I could see that. But on a personal level, I'm like, this is going to wreck her for days now. And so that's a paradox a lot of times when it comes to performers. And, so, and I think also with overcoming self-doubt, and I talk about this in my book, is language patterns too that you use. This is where it comes in my NLP training too. A lot of actors will describe themselves as struggling artists or starving artists. Like even in the musician world, it's like, I'm a starving musician.
Yeah, it's like it makes you legitimate. Like if somehow your art is more legitimate if you haven't sold out. So you're more like, I'm more like Lou Reed and the Velvet Underground. I'm more like
Yeah,
Alex Chilton because I'm really hardcore and I never sold out. Wait, so you're like that, then it's like, oh yeah, you got the rep. You got because you're not trying to just be in the top 10. You're trying to live it. You know,
yeah,
like Lou Reed, like lived the wild side.
of
It's like the
course.
idea. Or Alex Chilton, he was considered to be in that kind of same mold, but
Yeah. And that can sometimes lead to, again, self-doubt, because that creates that, you're so entrenched in an identity. And that can lead
so
to
how do you shake
self-sabotage.
that off? Like, how do you
Uh,
shake it's that self-sabotage is like part of your craft and you're actually being encouraged to do it as part of your work, but then you
well,
need to have like a survival mechanism. So how do you shake it off?
I think, a lot of times with self-sabotaging behavior, a person, anybody doesn't realize they're doing it very often. You know, they don't, it's not like a conscious thing, behavior, pattern all the time. So I think just recognizing it and helping someone recognize that you're getting in your own way, that can lead to problems. And I think just getting, helping someone get to that and realize that they're the own worst enemy right there.
Mhm.
And even by changing your identity, like I often tell actors, I'm like, you're not a struggling actor. You're a working actor. You're a professional working actor. And when you internalize that, I guarantee your audition performance is going to increase. You may not book every job, but I can, confidently say your booking rate's going to increase when you develop the mindset of a professional working actor.
And you have to identify as an agent, like the personality traits of the people you're working for, and figure out like what approach is actually going to reach this person.
Yeah, I mean, and I wouldn't tell this. I mean, if I said, "Well, I'm an aspiring agent," what good would that do? That's
Yeah,
not
but
going
nobody
to
wants that.
nobody. No, I mean, would you want to go to a doctor? Being in a
Aspiring
doctor's
doctor.
office, I'm an aspiring doctor. No, you wouldn't want that. You'd want someone who's very confident in their ability. Who is trained. And a lot of times with these actors, they spend a lot of money. They spend $80,000-$90,000 on a conservatory or a 4-year college degree or an acting school. And what I've noticed is because the industry is so competitive, there's a high dropout rate.
Hmm.
A lot of people just give up. They'll spend $80,000, $90,000 or $100,000 on a program to teach them acting, and then within 5 years of graduating, they're in another profession.
It's interesting. Do a lot of the actors you work with have more of a natural talent that they've kind of, or they like have your example of the schooling doesn't seem to work? Because a lot of times with musicians, it's not the guys that went to Berkeley and the conservatories. It's like a lot of times it's people who just seem to have their ability and they find their spot. Is that the same thing with actors?
Similar, yes. I mean, I do definitely. I'm a big advocate of training. As an actor, I think you need solid training as an actor. In my experience, but I also think that there's a lot of personal component. How well can you read other people? How well can you connect? I think it's a skill that everybody can learn, but you have to, your mind has to be clear.
Hmm.
Your mind has to be clear, and you have to be really motivated, and you also have to be coachable too.
Yeah, because I'm
And
wondering,
trainable.
like, do people really learn it by doing? Like, a lot of musicians, they go to the Delta to get into blues. They get under the tutelage of some blues guy, and they kind of like a Stevie Ray Vaughan. He didn't go to school, but he was like hanging around with Albert King and
Yeah,
listening to Albert King, hanging around all these bluesmen, and they're just doing it, right? A lot of times musicians, it's like they put themselves in their environment and they get the 10,000 hours of practice, right? They
Yeah.
do the work. And so I think everybody does the work, but maybe it's not as formal. Maybe it's
Yeah.
like
Well,
informal. Yeah.
it's still training, whether
Yeah.
you're, like in your example, Stevie Ray Vaughan, working under people, it's still a form of training because he's still learning from the masters, and future musicians learning other people. But it's the key thing for what I know, because I'm not well versed in the musician world, but I do know that it takes thousands of hours of practice, in order to become really good, decently good. And I've known musicians who would spend hours a day practicing. They would spend six,
Yeah. It's
seven, eight
kind of
hours,
like
10.
your routine. Yeah. It's your routine. It's kind of your muscle memory. Just like you practice for that 3-point shot and you're an athlete, the reason you hit it like 90% of the time because you did the
Hmm.
work. And if
Yeah,
you're learning the bass, to be able to play that bass and sing and not, have to look at it, you do the work. Like you do the work in the instrument, you eventually becomes a muscle memory. You just know where the
yeah,
chords are, you know where the notes are. You don't have to. And then the question then becomes like you bring a guy like that in the studio, and then
yeah.
he's asking like what are the chords, what are the what key is it, and they really know it. They can hear it and they know it, but they're still asking. He's like, why are they doing that? So then that's like the self-doubt. Like you know enough that you don't have to, you know what key you're in as soon as you hear it,
Hmm.
right? Why are you acting like you don't?
Exactly. And it's the same with that. I mean, acting is also an instrument too. Like you're acting, you're an instrument too. So it takes thousands of hours of practice too, even beyond the degree, whether or not you do that. I mean, there are plenty of actors, well-known actors, who never really went to formal acting school, but yet
Mhm.
they're really good. But they also spent thousands of hours practicing, whether
Yeah,
it's
they
in
did the work.
theater groups, training. Of course, they did the work, just like any good musician would do the same thing. It's not, and some people think, and I hear a lot of people who want to be movie stars will tell me, oh, I can just do this very easily. Like, no, you can't. You cannot, you know, because when you have a camera and you have lights in your face, and a lot of times with actors, with acting, especially with film, or even theater, you have to do the same performance over and over again. And it still has to be organically every time. So you could be
Mhm.
doing the same line over and over again, or the same scene, emotional scene, and it has to be the same organically every time, as
Yeah,
if you're doing it for the first time.
and a lot of it is not just your words, it's like how what your eyes look like in the angles, knowing how to use the camera and
Hmm.
knowing what it's gonna look like the way you're doing it. So you have to have this like awareness. Like you gotta read the room, read the scene and know how you present, right? And then that's the talent to know how to present for that scene for what the director and the writer and then
Yeah,
your interpretation of how to actually, because a lot of times there's like nonverbal stuff with your eyes. I spent a lot of time looking at like a lot of older films from the 50s and 40s, and there's a lot of concentration on the physical, like the good close-ups, and it's the look in the person's eye, it's the way
yeah.
they're moving their lips, it's all those facial expressions.
Again, because as an actor, you're parroting somebody else's writing, but it has to appear like it's you organically coming up with these thoughts, these emotions. They have to feel real, because otherwise, that's the only way you're going to sell a performance, or move the audience in your mind. And again, that's about connecting to a character, and that requires a lot of you know deep reflection, and again, thousands of hours of practice.
Yeah, it's just some people seem to have, and that kind of creative spark that they're kind of built to do that. They
Yeah.
and they go through the training, but they have some natural capability. And not that people can't be taught, but it does seem to be
Hmm.
like there seems to be there must be some kind of spark in these people that has like the base DNA. Like it seems like they're kind of meant for that.
Yeah. Well, and that's why, like, it's the people, the same thing they say with the musicians and the actors. It's the ones that are willing to do everything at all cost, and anything at all costs. You know, like even the musicians or the actors that you hear stories of, they had to live in their car, you know,
Mm,
because they were home, because they had to get, but they were so determined to
yeah.
succeed, and they did it because they put their mind to it. And so what I often think again is, if we put our mind to it and we're really serious, then we can be much more successful and not just be a slave to the environment in a sense.
Yeah, because the idea of being a starving artist and getting a different mindset and actually saying, "Well, I'm gonna be the successful artist." And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, the
Mhm,
idea there's something wrong with being a non-starving artist, but like, well, what's wrong with being a successful artist because I have a purpose, right? I have a purpose and I
mhm.
want to be this conduit for the arts and I feel I can do it through acting. Or maybe
Yeah,
I can do it through directing or writing or whatever.
of course. And as an actor, you're a storyteller and you're moving the audience. So, you know, think about your purpose of being this inspiring light to the audience, moving them, you know, and so it's all about just, you know, the audience has, everyone has a right to your performance. So, and you have a right to succeed. And I think also a lot of it too, with self sabotage, comes with our beliefs about money
Mm,
and wealth. And I think with money, a lot of people have a very conflicted relationship with against the money, because we're taught sometimes in lessons that, oh, money is, you know, the root of all evil, and money makes people bad. And you know, we may have heard these messages growing up, you know, whether it's from indirectly or directly from family or from society, and then we internalize that, and not even consciously.
mhm.
And you know, so you know, if you have the belief system that money is the root of all evil, even on the subconscious level, you're not evil. So you know, so that you almost repel money in a sense.
Yeah, it's like the law of attraction. Like the law of attraction, like you're gonna go toward what your kind of energy you're putting out. So if you feel that, wealth and success is like not the vibe that you want to be on, not the frequency, then you're gonna kind of bring not being in that zone to you. And
Hmm.
then you're gonna continue in that frame, kind of like a codependency, and you're gonna be stuck in that loop until you finally have this like this epiphany that there's nothing wrong with doing that. Because if
Yeah.
it gets my art to bigger, if I can reach more people, well, I might make money. Like, but I'm actually my
Hmm.
message is coming out, my art is coming out. What's wrong with that? I'm actually reaching why I do
Yeah.
it in the first place. Like,
Yeah. Of course. So yeah, there's different factors there, but it has to do a lot to do with your relationship with money too. You know, having a you know, and I often kind of say, you know, one way to reframe it is like, look, um, you know, if you have um, you know, fears about money, what about keeping making money to to live and also to help other people? Think
yeah,
of
yeah,
all the
give it
people
to
you can help.
charity. Like you
Think
could,
of all
if
the
you
charities you can help, you know,
yeah,
with
you could
that.
go and become like one of these actors that goes and donates to all these feed the world, feed the children. Like, so there's nothing wrong with you being successful because it's going to go help that, right? Or you're going to help a starving artist. You go
Hmm.
set up a theater training group and do off-Broadway plays and bring new talent in. There's a
Yeah.
lot of artists that will go and take time to bring in like the unsigned, artist because they feel like I want to go look for these people and I
Yeah.
think they should get a shot. So then I'm going to actually kind of fund that. I'm going to subsidize that.
Yeah. And you know, even if you put on do some plays or do some theater groups to raise money for a cause, you know, or to um, donate proceeds for a film to a cause, you know, things like that. Um, so there's a lot you can do, and sometimes wording that and saying, look, you know, you want to do what you love acting, right? So you need, you know, you need to survive. So why not use, you know, the money as a sense to, hey, I'm just learning how to, I'm using the money to use to acting, you know, so I can now create that. The wealth is my ability to produce and to give back. And, you know, and I think that, you know, is one way to improve that, to self doubt and self sabotage is, you know, improving your relationship with money. Um, and just, overcoming the self-doubt, I think is so,
Well, the
so important.
self-doubt kind of also tied to your self-esteem. So that you had these concepts of like toxic, high self-esteem and healthy self-esteem. I think a lot of times artists feel like, well, is it arrogant to kind of be able to strut on stage and be confident enough to be on that stage like a Mick Jagger
Yeah,
or Freddie Mercury or a Prince or somebody like how can I strut like that? How can I do
yeah,
that?
yeah.
But that's part of the act. You have to do that.
Of course, and there's because I have in my book I have a chapter on toxic self-esteem, and what I say is, the difference between like being, having good self-esteem, which is like I can do this, I can do this. Toxic self-esteem is when you high self-esteem when you think you're better than everybody else.
Mhm.
And how sometimes with people with very high toxic self-esteem, it's also fragile self-esteem. So, and that can cause someone to hold back too, because the possibility of being disappointed, or the possibility of not getting the role, or
Mhm.
not winning that role, or not winning the audience over, can be very traumatic, especially when you have this high inflated viewpoint. So what better way to avoid this by not trying, by not applying yourself as an artist or as an actor? Because again, it's I don't want to have other people fear I don't want to be disappointed. You
Yeah,
know,
also like you get scared of being think people think you're arrogant, but having that healthy confidence to be able to kind of strut around. Like if you continue to strut like Mick Jagger, through 90% of the day versus like I've seen Mick Jagger talk and he's not strutting like he does with the Stones, right? He talks like a businessman.
yeah.
He talks
Well,
like a guy that's like accountant or something. It's like he doesn't strut like the way he does on stage. It's like he's able to separate it. At
yeah,
least
because
it seems like
he's doing a persona when he's on stage, and there's a persona when he's not on stage. And a lot of musicians are like that too. A lot of even some of the modern day rappers. I would hear that when they're not rapping, that they actually have a very good business sense, that they almost have like a
like they're a
persona that could
CEO.
be CEO or
Or
Wall Street even.
yeah,
And
yeah,
that
like a Wall Streeter.
yeah, because they know how to play the room. They play the game in a sense. They know how to mold their persona, into fit in a different situation.
So
Um,
situational awareness is part
yeah,
of the thing. But if you can realize like that might be just a point in time and you don't have to be that like all day, right? So that you could if that's just part of the stage or that's part of the shot, that's part of the scene, that's part of the film, that's part of the TV show, right? But I can separate and still be my actual self, which doesn't have to be that like offensive, right? If maybe you're playing characters that are somehow somewhat offensive, and people on the street they actually think you're that person,
yeah.
but you're not.
Well, yeah, and I'll give you an example of this too. Like, one of the well-known actors of good acting legends of our time is Anthony Hopkins, and a lot of
Mhm.
people, would see him on the street after, like, when Hannibal came out, and Silence of the Lambs came
Yeah,
out, and how a lot of people were scared of him, or
thought he
would
was
like,
Hannibal.
or would walk up to him, and and he would sometimes even get annoyed when people would walk up to him quoting Hannibal Lecter. And there were times when he was just saying, "Look, I just want to eat my meal. I'm just a person who read what another person wrote." And that's where I think a lot of times, that's a good thing. I think when people have that inability to distinguish, the actor from the real person, that means the actor did a great job. So I often think when somebody tells an actor, "Oh, you were scary," I think that's a great compliment. Great.
Which shows like they're good at my craft, but
Yeah,
like
you're good.
that's
You're
not
good at what
me.
you do.
Yeah,
So,
it's like that. So it's interesting how you have to have these boundaries, and I think sometimes what happens when you're an artist, right? You go kind of deep into vulnerability, right? And so
mhm.
a lot of times as an artist, you have to capture that vulnerability and the world sees it. And then, that can hurt you. Like you
Yeah,
said, it can actually damage you. And it's kind of like if you think about like a wolf chasing a deer and the deer gets away and it kind of shakes it off, it physically like shakes. And somehow we've lost the ability to know how to shake stuff off from that trauma.
Yeah.
unless you actually talk to somebody like yourself and teach people like what's their method to kind of do what that deer does.
Yeah. It's just being able to shake it off. And again, sometimes it just might be movement, maybe, getting up and, running around a little bit and just, getting, just physically loosening up your body and getting rid of that time and just not even thinking about it. But a lot of times, again, these directors and producers are not really trained in this area. They're so focused on getting that good shot or getting that, the money shot, getting the person, who's a wreck, and not calming and de-stressing them down before, the day's over.
So does the movie industry realize that maybe the director is never going to be like that kind of person, but maybe they should have consultants like yourself on
I
the
would do.
set?
I think that's a great idea. And I would hope at some point that there are more of us on sets like this, especially when there's, I think even just, but like normal benign content too. That's not necessarily too traumatic. Just sometimes, just being able to get out of, the mode
Yeah.
of getting out of the
Oh
character, I
yeah.
think would be really helpful.
Yeah, if you actually
Um,
had that as part of the process, like after you go through such an intense scene and maybe had to do it so many reshoots on it that okay, yeah, the director's done with that, but now you go to a person like yourself and you help, bring the actor back down,
yeah, break their state, change their emotional state, and just getting them out of that. It's over. You're no longer in that, fight or flight mode anymore.
But a lot of times people don't look at the big picture, like the holistic picture of do we want to have these actors actually be healthy so they can continue to work, or do we just care about the short term? The
And
short term is
that's
this film, just this moment, instead of looking at the whole piece.
that's
Well,
yeah,
maybe I'd like to have this guy for my next film.
exactly. I want this guy disturbed so he can, do a great job later on. And that's that's a cost. That's definitely a cost. But and then kind of like, I think even training actors, even maybe there's a way to get to that dark place without really having to go to that dark place.
Oh yeah, a different
You know,
method.
like to use a different type of method to give that performance, but also be less taxing on you emotionally.
Hmm. Well, I
I
think
mean,
yeah, people have been kind of trained to like, you think Raging Bull and De Niro losing the weight and then gaining the weight. It's
yeah,
just people going to extremes because it's well, you're the big money actor. You got to self-sacrifice to that degree. And
of
is
course,
that really necessary when you could wear a fat suit? When you could do
exactly.
CGI? Do you really need to do that?
Yeah, well, nowadays, I mean, especially with AI now coming out, I mean, you can really, have anybody do anything.
Yeah, you don't
You know,
need to do that.
you
Though,
don't need
De
to.
Niro might say, well, look, that was good for the role, and you can say Pacino, Dog Day Afternoon to get all that frenetic the way he was. It's like, how did you get so frenetic? How did you do that? But it's like you got in that mind frame.
Yeah,
But is that hard to, how do you get out of that mind frame?
yeah. I mean, I think just work. First of all, just de-stress, meditating. Um, getting. One of the things we often do is break the state, which is like, sometimes just quickly asking somebody like a random question, get them talking about something immediately afterwards about something totally unrelated.
Mm.
Um, it could be like, somebody gives an emotional scene right after the scene's over. Yes, and okay, what's your favorite breakfast cereal? Talk to me about that. So they're
Totally,
out of that.
totally out of left field.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Get
that's the
the
whole
mind
thing.
off of it.
That's one way to do it. Just get your mind off of it immediately.
That's a cool
Um,
thing. A lot of people probably don't think that way. But
no,
they have no idea. It's like, oh, you know, it's just over and that's it.
yeah,
Without kind of like, it's like with the musicians that they go from the big stage right into the bus or
yeah,
right into the plane or right back to the hotel. And then they're like, you went from like 100 down to zero.
yeah.
Maybe you shouldn't go from 100 to zero. Maybe you need to kind of
Maybe
not
go to
do that.
100 to 70 to 60 to 50, and then
Yeah.
slowly go
Step it
down there.
down.
Yes.
which,
Yeah,
they don't think about it because the schedule says you gotta get back on the bus because you gotta get to the next place.
of course.
Where
Because now
where
you get
maybe you space it out, but then, then your manager is like, "Well, I can't space it out because we need to do A, B, C, D, E,"
of course. Yeah. Yeah, and there's it's money too, because unfortunately, a lot of these actors and musicians are viewed as a commodity more than a person, human being.
Mhm. Then I guess it's up to you as the actor to start to value that, right? So once you start to realize I don't have to live like that, right? Like I don't need to be in this chaos state to do my work. Because a lot of times I always there's this whole thing about some of the great singer songwriters, that a lot of people liked their work when they were actually in bad state. They were like James Taylor, like
Hmm.
when Fire and Rain, he was like addicted. He was in a depressed state. Then when he finally got married and was happy, he did an album and nobody really liked it
Right.
because it does he have to be in that depressed bad state to actually do the art that you like. And then the industry is like, well, you need to get back to that. It's like, but
Yeah.
back to that, like it could kill me. Like I don't know
And
if I can get back to that.
of course, there's going to be a cost to that. If you do put them back to there, if you don't get them out of there.
Yeah. And then once you realize, like, how can I actually put myself in that fire and rain state without actually being in the fire and rain?
Yeah,
You know,
totally,
how
absolutely,
can I write that kind of material without having to live that?
absolutely. So,
Which
yeah,
is a
good
trick
point.
because a lot of
It's
people, it's hard because some people feel like, well, I don't know if I can do that. I mean,
Yeah, you don't know if you can do that. And it's hard to think about that, but that's important,
yeah,
to be
that's
able to do that.
just trying to be healthy is hard in this industry that might not be so concerned. Like you said, you're a commodity. So how do you get from being a commodity to being treated like a human being?
Yeah, and that's where I think we have to help actors remember their humanity, that they're human beings,
Hmm.
and that they're valuable human beings too. And that we care about them, and that's where I think um, even getting breaks, and because a lot of times actors are working 14, 15 hours a day on set, uh, or even in a theater, Broadway, putting 8 shows a week, that they're not given enough time to decompress,
Hmm.
between performances. So
That's really important because I think, if you start thinking about like the idea of how do you frame like that kind of train? You get put on this train and you
mhm,
can't get off. But then maybe there's a fear of failure. Like if you ever ask to get off of that train, then your opportunity goes away because that's what's expected. So like
yes,
if you start to say, well, I need a little more breaks, and say, well, nobody else gets breaks. It's like we don't do that.
yeah, because again, time is money, and all of that, and and the thing, the actor needs a break, at a time, or the musician needs that break, if they
But I
want to.
think failure, I think there's a tendency to want to be perfect. Like, I'm a big believer in the idea of happy accidents
Yeah,
as a creative person, kind of being in a flow state and then capturing that. And there's other people that they're looking for perfection to the extent that it becomes like really
detrimental.
overwhelming. Yeah,
Yes,
like you do 100 takes when really the first three are actually good, but you
yeah,
keep on doing them. And it's like, what's the point of that? Right? Like, there's a lot of
yeah,
times with musicians, like it's usually the fourth take. Once you get past to like 100, that like you get diminishing returns. It's like it really probably is a lot better at their earlier state. It might not be perfect, but it actually is closer to what you wanted to do.
of course. Yeah, and there's one thing, and especially in the neuro linguistic program NLP world, there's no such thing as failure. There's only feedback. So we kind of look at failure as being more of a feedback. Like it helps you
Exactly.
grow,
Yeah.
and
Exactly.
it
Yeah.
makes you more human. And if you think about it, one of the things that we're over attracted to as viewers is outtakes in TV shows and movies, because
Yeah,
it's
they want to see them.
yeah, because it makes everybody human. It actually adds to it. This is why like, a lot of people used to like going to live TV recordings, because you would see the actors occasionally flub the
See them do
line.
it. Yeah. See
And
the
it's funny because
ejaculation
it adds,
actually do it. You see him do it. It's like, oh, that's what how it goes. See Mary Tyler Moore actually do it.
yeah,
You know?
because it makes it's a humanizing element. So
Yeah, it's real
great.
important because I think that the whole idea, like a lot of times, like in music, we talk about how there's like when we get a little more advanced, we start talking about there's no really bad notes. There are opportunities. And in jazz, Herbie Hancock and Miles Davis have talked about this kind of ad nauseum. It's like when you're doing fusion or you're doing bebop like live, like that so-called perceived missed note is a lot of times an opportunity. But if
Yes.
you don't look at it that way, then you'll think you wrecked the whole set, right? But if you actually say, "Hey, this is a chance to evolve the song," that's a
Hmm.
different mind frame than saying, "I wrecked the song."
Right.
You know?
You know, and you can use it because a lot of times even the wording you use too could be very interesting because, depending on the context, um, like sometimes an actor will do a great job will say, "I just killed it." And that usually means a good thing, even though some
Yeah,
people who
yeah,
might
that's a
not be
good
in
thing.
the industry might sound like, "Well, that sounds bad." No, it's not. It's actually a good thing.
Yeah, that's counterintuitive, but yeah, it's
Yeah,
like yeah, did you kill you killed it on stage because you actually changed the composition and it's actually
and it
yeah,
worked.
it's better because like I could go and use the DAW and repeat exactly the way I did the master. Or I
Yeah,
could actually go out and evolve the song and kind of play it based on I read the room, I read
yeah,
my fellow musicians, and we played it the way we felt like that night, right?
yeah,
And so that's a lot of times when you see live performances, there's a little adjustments. They're doing Death of a Salesman live, and it's like there might be an adjustment for per
yeah.
show, like how that actor delivers those lines.
Yeah, and that's why usually like the first performance to the 10th performance is going to be very different, because even though the script may remain is going to remain the same, but the performance is going to be different because you would find mistakes. You think this didn't work, or maybe add this, throw this away, add this, add that.
Yeah,
But
it
being
just
open to that is really important, and
yeah,
not
kind of being
expecting
open.
everything.
Yeah, because like, are you open? Like, if you're in a a lot of times if you're in a band, you have the guy that maybe wrote the song, like the Lennon McCartney type of thing. Like they wrote it, right? But then George Harrison said, "Well, I think it should go like this." And
Hmm.
Ringo said, "Well, I think no, I think it should go like that." But like, do you take that feedback and actually do it, or say, "Hey, I'm going to top down it. It's
Yeah,
going to be exactly the way I wanted it, and you're going to do it note for note the way I told you to." That usually breaks
exactly.
up the band
Yeah,
because eventually you get tired of it.
of course. Yeah, nobody wants to be told. They want to do all the time. So
So
great.
yeah, I think it's just I think treating people like human beings, like you say, instead of commodities, and
That's a big thing, yes.
and symbols. Like if you're like if you're a symbol, like what's the humanity in the symbol?
Right.
You know, so like if you're a sex symbol or you're this type of character, and that's the way everybody perceives you, like well, you got to stay in that zone.
Yes, absolutely.
So, do you have like any kind of advice for maybe top three things based on our conversation? That you lessons learned from what you've been doing over the years that you can kind of convey.
Yeah, one thing that I often say is, just really remember the connected reason why you're here. Um, just really can remember the reason why you're here, and that's to be a performer and that you're inspiring others. Another thing I often talk about, and I talk about this in my book, there's one of the things I often talk about is to document, journal all the good things that happen to you. Whether you get a good performance in a show, you get good feedback from an acting coach or a casting director. Write it down, or your boss, write it down. An audience member inspires you, write it down, and then when you create what's called a happy file, and when you look at that, um, just remember the happy file, and that pull out your happy file when you start to have that self doubt creep in. Um, and then also, I would just say, finally, is just repeat to the mantra every day that I deserve to be here. I deserve to perform. I deserve to do everything in a sense. So I think that's so important.
Yeah, I think it's just really great advice for people to take to heart. what we've been talking about today is a lot of times people just maybe think, oh, these guys are so in this other world, I don't have to consider like the humanity.
Hmm.
But it's like maybe you do.
Yeah.
You definitely do. And a lot of times the public maybe is not connecting the dots. But I
Hmm.
think it's interesting that we had this conversation so that people can
Yeah.
kind of, I think that people in the industry can benefit from what we're talking about. But I think the audience can also have maybe their expectations be a little bit more empathetic.
Yes. That would be the dream. That would be the goal.
I want to thank you again for being on the show.
Um,
It's always great. I know you had a time constraint, but I think we had a great conversation.
yes, I really appreciate you inviting me. It was having a great conversation with you.
Yeah, I want to let you. We were just on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. We will be on all the other platforms that podcasts can be listened to or watched by tomorrow. And I want to thank you again for being a guest on the Family Electric Ghost podcast.
Well, thank you for having me.
Have a good night.
You too.